The clock on the mantel ticks a rhythmic, indifferent metronome, measuring the pulse of a life that feels simultaneously frantic and strangely stagnant. It is 3:00 a.m., the hour of the wolf, where the heavy velvet curtains of the world are drawn, and the mind is left alone in the cold, unvarnished light of its own consciousness. You sit, perhaps, staring at the shadows dancing upon the wall, wondering why the blueprints you drafted for your existence, the grand architecture of success, the intimacy of love, the tranquility of a soul at peace, remain nothing more than ghostly sketches, forever hovering just out of reach. Consider the paradox. You are the architect of your own history, the sole proprietor of your desires, yet you stand outside your own life like a tourist pressing his face against the cold glass of a shop window. You want the treasure inside, you see it, you crave it, yet the door remains stubbornly bolted. Every morning, you rise with the intent of conquest, and every evening, you retreat into the same cycle of limitation, frustration, and quiet desperation. You tell yourself that the obstacles are external, the economy, the timing, the lack of resources, the facts of your current circumstance. But what if the lock is not on the outside? What if the key is not in the hands of some distant fate, but buried beneath the floorboards of your own mind? Tonight, the veil is pulled back. You are about to discover that you have been living in a state of self-imposed exile, governed by a hidden hand that executes your commands with terrifying, literal precision, even the commands you never intended to send. To understand the mechanics of the human psyche is to understand the hierarchy of two distinct, yet inextricably linked domains, the conscious gatekeeper and the subconscious servant. The conscious gatekeeper is the intellect, the ego, the critic. It is the part of you that perceives the facts. It scans the horizon for danger, analyzes the tax returns, measures the distance between your current bank balance and your dreams, and perpetually whispers, "Be realistic." It is the guardian of the status quo. It is by its very nature a creature of doubt. It views any deviation from the established pattern as a threat to the stability of the system. Why is it so resistant to change? Because the gatekeeper operates on the principle of survival, not evolution. It believes that the familiar, however painful, is safer than the unknown, however glorious. When you attempt to impress a new desire upon your mind, "I am wealthy, I am healthy, I am loved," the gatekeeper instantly intercepts these seeds. It demands evidence. It says, "You have no money, therefore you are not wealthy. You are lonely, therefore you are not loved." It is a masterful logician, yet it is utterly blind to the creative power of the imagination. The subconscious servant, conversely, is the soil of the soul. It is vast, primal, and devoid of judgment. It does not know how to argue. It does not know how to doubt. It possesses no concept of impossible. It is like an infinite, dark, fertile ocean that waits only for a drop of intention to begin crystallizing into physical reality. The subconscious servant has but one mandate: to mirror the internal state of its master. How does it receive these instructions? It does not listen to your hopeful thoughts or your intellectual prayers. It listens to the dominant impression. The recursion begins here. If the subconscious is the creator, why does it create misery? Because it is a mirror, not an originator. You have spent years unconsciously feeding it a diet of fear, doubt, and limitation. You have, by your persistent focus on what you lack, instructed your faithful servant to build a life around that lack. You have impressed upon the deep waters of your being the conviction of your own mediocrity or struggle. The subconscious, true to its nature, has merely followed the blueprints you provided. The tragedy is not that the mechanism is broken. The tragedy is that the mechanism is working perfectly, but it is working for a version of you that you no longer wish to be. You have become the victim of your own automated programming. Imagine a great, ancient fortress standing atop a windswept cliff. This is your life. The fortress is surrounded by a massive, impenetrable curtain wall. This wall is the conscious gatekeeper. It has a single, narrow gate that is constantly guarded by a sentinel who checks the credentials of every idea that tries to enter. If a merchant comes to the gate carrying a sack of gold, an idea of prosperity, the guard demands to see the tax receipts, the business plans, and the proof of current wealth. If the merchant cannot produce them, the guard mocks him and sends him away. "You are a pauper," the guard sneers. "Why would you bring me gold? You are not allowed in." Thus, the dream of wealth is turned away at the gate, day after day. There was a man once, a scholar of the esoteric, who lived in the shadow of this fortress. He saw that the gate was guarded by a sentinel who could not be bribed or outwitted. The scholar realized that as long as he tried to walk through the front gate during the bright, clear hours of the day, he would never succeed. The guard was too alert, his logic too sharp. So, the scholar watched the sentinel. He noticed that as the sun dipped below the horizon and the long purple shadows stretched across the cliffs, the guard would begin to yawn. The guard's eyelids would grow heavy. His focus would blur. He would move away from his post, distracted by the coming darkness, his vigilance crumbling under the weight of exhaustion. The scholar did not storm the gate. He did not try to kill the guard. He simply waited. In the quiet, blue-black silence of the night, when the guard was drifting into a stupor, the scholar slipped through the shadows of the postern, a small, hidden, and unguarded side door that the sentinel had forgotten even existed. Once inside the fortress, the scholar was free. He walked through the halls of the inner courtyard, the subconscious, and planted his seeds directly into the dark, receptive earth. He didn't need to ask permission. He didn't need to show proof. He simply planted, and the soil, having no guard to stop it, began to weave the dream into the fabric of the fortress itself. The lesson is clear. You cannot fight the gatekeeper with logic, for logic is its weapon. You must instead learn the rhythm of the guard's fatigue. You must find the hidden entrance that exists in the twilight of your own consciousness. The truth is this: you are the master of the fortress, even if you have forgotten how to command the gate. To change your life, you must cease trying to convince your conscious, logical mind that your desires are already true. Your intellect will only provide you with reasons why they cannot be. Instead, you must begin to practice the art of the clandestine impression. This evening, when you prepare for rest, do not engage in the struggle of trying to force your mind to believe in a new reality through effort or strain. Effort is the language of the gatekeeper. It is the sound of struggle. Instead, as you lie in bed, allow yourself to drift. Let your body grow heavy. Feel the tension draining from your muscles, from your brow, your jaw, your shoulders. As the world of facts begins to recede and the darkness of your room becomes a sanctuary, you are entering the twilight gateway. In this drowsy, half-awake state, the guard is leaving his post. You are slipping toward the postern gate. But what awaits you in that inner courtyard? How do you craft the seed so that it takes root with absolute certainty? You have unlocked the door, but you have yet to learn the language that the earth of your subconscious understands. Tomorrow, we step into the twilight itself. We shall master the state akin to sleep, the most sacred tool in the architect's kit. You are standing at the threshold of the garden. Are you ready to see what grows when the god is asleep? There exists a singular moment in the rhythm of the day, a fragile, liminal space that most of humanity rushes through without a second glance. It is that soft, blue-hued transition where the sun has long since relinquished its hold on the sky and the world of form begins to dissolve into the world of shadow. It is the twilight not merely of the day, but of consciousness itself. As the body sinks into the plush embrace of the bed and the eyelids grow heavy, there occurs a profound suspension of the laws that govern the daylight hours. In this state, the rigid, iron-clad walls of what the world calls reality soften. The sharp edges of yesterday's failures and tomorrow's anxieties blur into a gentle haze. If one were to observe a man at this hour, they would see only a figure drifting towards sleep. Yet, beneath that stillness, a cosmic event is unfolding. This is the moment of the twilight gateway. It is a paradox of human existence that the most potent, most expansive, and most creative work a person can perform is achieved not through the exertion of muscle or the frantic calculation of the intellect, but through the deliberate surrender of them. For in this drowsy, twilight state, the mind is no longer tethered to the external. It is no longer forced to defend itself against the onslaught of sensory evidence. It floats in the space between the waking world and the infinite reservoir of the subconscious. Most people treat this state as a nuisance, a mere biological necessity to be endured before the next day's labor begins. They do not realize that they are stepping into the Holy of Holies, the inner sanctuary where the loom of creation is forever turning. To enter this state is to arrive at the edge of a new world, a place where the logic of the waking mind is as useless as a map of the ocean to a sailor adrift in the stars. It is here, in the quiet, weightless descent, that the architecture of destiny is drafted. To grasp the mechanics of the state akin to sleep, SATS, one must first interrogate the nature of the mind's defense system. Why does the conscious gatekeeper insist on its iron-fisted control during the daylight hours? The gatekeeper's obsession is rooted in a fundamental misunderstanding of what reality actually is. It believes that the world is a fixed, immutable construct, a collection of objects, circumstances, and consequences that exist independently of the observer. Therefore, the gatekeeper assumes that its role is to be a faithful reporter of this truth. It calculates, I am poor because my bank account is empty. I am unloved because I am alone. It operates on the logic of the echo, believing that the echo is the voice. But why is the gatekeeper so hostile to change? Because the ego, which sits at the helm of the conscious mind, derives its sense of self from the consistency of these reports. If the gatekeeper were to admit that the bank account is a reflection of an internal assumption rather than an objective fact, the gatekeeper would lose its purpose. It would have to acknowledge that it is not a reporter, but a co-creator. This terrifies the intellect, for it carries the burden of absolute responsibility. It is far easier to believe in a world of rigid constraints than to accept that one is holding the brush that paints the universe. How, then, does the Twilight Gateway bypass this resistance? It does so by manipulating the brain's frequency. In the waking state, the mind operates primarily in beta waves, the realm of analytical thought, problem solving, and sensory perception. This is the frequency of the gatekeeper at maximum vigilance. As one drifts into drowsiness, the brain decelerates into alpha and eventually theta waves. In this shift, the critical factor, that psychological bouncer who demands credentials from every idea, simply falls asleep. It becomes distracted. The logical mind, which usually insists on cross-referencing every desire against current sensory evidence, loses its ability to communicate. The feedback loop that says, this is not true, that is not possible, is severed. Why is the subconscious more receptive here? Because the subconscious mind is not a logical machine. It is a creative medium. It requires a seed that is not burdened by the shadow of doubt. In the waking world, a seed of desire is always accompanied by the shadow of its absence, because the waking mind sees both the desire and the lack. In the theta state, however, there is no shadow. The mind is a blank slate. By slipping a vivid, felt impression into this silence, you are placing an image into an environment where it cannot be contradicted. There is no one there to say, this is a lie. Consequently, the subconscious, being a mirror, accepts the impression as the absolute, objective truth, and begins the work of rearranging the outer world to match it. Consider the account of a woman, let us call her Clara, whose existence had been hollowed out by the agonizing drought of insomnia. For 5 years, she lived in a purgatory of her own making. The nights were her enemy, a vast, dark stretch of hours where her mind would run in frantic circles, cataloging the reasons for her distress, the failures of her past, and the bleakness of her future. Clara had sought help in every quarter. She had swallowed pills that dulled the edges of her existence but could not touch the root of the issue. She had sat in the offices of therapists who asked her to analyze why she was unhappy, as if understanding the why of a wound would stitch it shut. She lived in a cycle of realistic despair. Every night, As she climbed into bed, she whispered to herself the mantra of her entrapment. I am not a good sleeper. My mind is too active. I am doomed to this exhaustion. When she presented herself to a teacher of these hidden arts, she was a ghost of a person trembling, hollowed, and profoundly skeptical. She clung to her insomnia like a protective armor. But these are the facts, she insisted, gesturing to the dark circles under her eyes. I am only being realistic. The teacher looked at her, not with pity, but with the dispassionate gaze of one who sees the machinery behind the curtain. My dear, he said, you are not being realistic. You are being creative. You are a prolific artist of the night, and you have painted a masterpiece of restlessness. Every time you accept the fact of your insomnia, you are instructing your subconscious servant to procure more of it. You are the one who ordered this feast of sleeplessness, and the servant is merely being faithful to the bill of fare. He did not tell her to fight the insomnia. He did not tell her to force the sleep. He taught her the trick of the twilight gateway. He instructed her to cease all effort. He told her that as she lay in the quiet of her room, she was to suspend the fact of her 5-year struggle. She was to occupy the state akin to sleep, that drowsy, liminal space, and in that space, she was to construct a new memory. She was to imagine, with the soft intensity of a dreamer, that she was already a person who slept like a stone. She was to feel the weight of her limbs as if she were sinking into the softest down. She was to recall the feeling of waking up, not as a future hope, but as a finished history. She practiced this, not with the tension of trying to sleep, but with the gentle playfulness of remembering sleep. She bypassed the critical factor by treating the sleep as a past event, a memory of a day well rested. For the first few nights, the conscious mind clawed at her, shouting that she was a liar, that she was still awake, that this was foolish. But she persisted in the drowsiness. She stayed in the gateway. And within a week, the armored walls of her 5-year struggle began to buckle. The subconscious, having been fed the impression of being a good sleeper, could not hold the pattern of the insomniac. It began to organize her biology, her thoughts, and her environment to match the new memory. The insomnia did not merely fade, it vanished, as if it had been nothing more than a bad dream that had finally been interrupted by the light of day. Clara had not forced reality to change. She had simply changed the impression the reality was based upon. The transformation of your life begins not in the boardroom or the laboratory, but in the soft, quiet space of your own bedroom. To embody this truth today, you must treat the moments before sleep as the most sacred creative laboratory you possess. Do not carry the baggage of your day, the arguments, the spreadsheets, the failures into that gateway. If you do, you are simply replanting the old garden. Instead, implement the sacred routine. As you lie down tonight, do not set out to manifest or work. That is the language of the gatekeeper. Instead, set out to rehearse. Choose the outcome you desire, not the struggle to achieve it, but the feeling of its finished reality. If you desire success, do not visualize the hard work. Visualize the quiet satisfaction of the task already completed. If you desire love, do not visualize the search. Visualize the warmth of a presence beside you. Enter the drowsy state. Allow your body to sink. In that twilight, hold the image of your desire. Do not watch it like a movie on a screen. Step into the image. Feel the textures, hear the sounds, breathe the air of that reality. Repeat this scene in your mind like a loop, over and over, until the scene possesses the natural, effortless quality of a memory. When the conscious mind tries to interject with facts, do not argue. Simply drift back into the feeling. You are not fighting the god. You are ignoring him while he sleeps. You have learned to slip through the side door. You have learned to bypass the god, but you have only scratched the surface of the power you wield. For now that you are inside the fortress, you must learn to navigate the halls. You have the gateway, but you must acquire the proper perspective, the difference between watching your life and living it. In our next assembly, we shall dismantle the greatest error in the human narrative, the distinction between the observer and the experiencer. We are moving toward the art of imagining from. Are you ready to stop watching the film of your life and start directing the scenes from within? The twilight awaits. Imagine a man standing in the center of a great, ornate theater. The velvet curtains are heavy, smelling of dust and age, and the gilded balconies stretch upward into a yawning, impenetrable gloom. He is not a member of the audience. He is, by all accounts, the producer of the play. Yet, as the lights dim and the orchestra begins its mournful overture, he settles into a velvet chair in the third row. He watches the stage with rapt attention. He sees a character, a man who looks exactly like him, struggling through a scene of profound heartbreak, poverty, and isolation. He clenches his fists as his double on stage suffers. He weeps as the character experiences loss. He cheers as the character catches a fleeting glimpse of joy. He is so profoundly engrossed in the spectacle that he forgets the most fundamental truth of his existence. The projector, the film, and the stage are all under his command. He believes he is watching the story of his life, unaware that his act of watching is the very force that keeps the film running. This is the central irony of human existence. You spend your days as a spectator to your own tragedy. You gaze upon the world as if it were a pre-recorded motion picture, a finished script written by a cruel and fickle God, over which you have no power. You see yourself getting the job, finding the love, or receiving the wealth, but you view these things as external events that must happen to you. You observe your life from the distance of the third row, analyzing the scenery, critiquing the lighting, and dreading the next act. But consider the paradox. The moment you move to the third row to observe your desires, you create a chasm between the observer and the experience. You solidify the distance. By watching for your dreams to manifest, you are, by your very act of observation, affirming that they are not yet here. You are cementing the separation. To watch the film is to remain the audience. To step onto the stage is to become the author. To master the art of manifestation, one must undergo a fundamental shift in the geometry of the mind. This is the distinction between imagining of and imagining from. Why does the subconscious mind reject the imagining of? Because the subconscious is the engine of identity. It is not an external warehouse where you deposit requests. It is the fundamental fabric of your being. When you imagine of your desire, when you visualize yourself in the third person, watching yourself succeed, your subconscious mind registers the disconnect. It sees the image of you and the image of the goal as two separate entities. The subconscious, in its infinite, literal-minded logic, concludes, since you are the one watching the success, you are not the one experiencing the success. The success belongs to that person on the screen, not to the person in the chair. By imagining of the desire, you are confirming your role as the observer, not the participant. You are essentially telling your own mind that the reality you seek is a spectator sport. How, then, do we bridge this chasm? By shifting the perspective of the I. We must use the recursive thinking method to interrogate our own awareness. If I am the one doing the imagining, and I am the one looking at the image, who is the I that is actually doing the living? The I that imagines is the creator. The I that exists in the image is the creation. If you place your consciousness into the creation, you cease to be the observer and become the experiencer. Why is this so difficult for the human mind? Because the intellect is trained to view the world through the senses, through eyes that look outward, hands that touch physical objects, and ears that hear external sounds. We are hardwired to perceive reality as something that happens out there. To imagine from is to reverse this flow. It is an act of internal rebellion. It requires you to close your physical eyes and open your internal ones, to ignore the external facts and prioritize the internal sensation. How does this change the subconscious? When you imagine from the perspective of the fulfilled desire, you are no longer sending a request to the universe. You are sending a command from the throne of your own being. You are claiming the reality as your own current state. The subconscious mind does not possess a sense of time or a sense of distance. It only knows the here and the now. If you feel the reality as if it is happening here and now, the subconscious has no choice but to manifest it out there. You have effectively turned the internal into the external. In the bustling city of desire, there lived a woman named Elena. For years, she had been a devoted student of the arts of visualization. She had spent hours every evening behind her closed eyelids, constructing a vivid, panoramic film of her life as she wished it to be. She saw herself in a white dress, walking down a grand aisle. She watched herself exchanging vows with the man she loved. She saw the guests cheering, the confetti falling, the beauty of the ceremony. She played this film with technical brilliance. She saw the color of the flowers, the texture of the lace, the expression on her beloved's face. Yet months turned into years, and the scene remained trapped behind her eyelids. In her physical world, she remained alone. The man she loved was still a stranger, and the wedding was nothing more than a private, flickering memory. Elena grew weary. She went to her mentor, a man who had long since discarded the need for films and screens. "I have visualized with perfect clarity," she lamented. "I have watched the movie of my success 1,000 times. Why does the screen of my life remain dark?" The mentor smiled and asked, "When you see this wedding, where do you stand?" "I stand in the aisle," she replied. "I watch myself walk toward him. I watch the beauty of the moment." "Ah," the mentor said, "you are the best director in the world, Elena, but you are not the bride. You are the spectator. Your subconscious mind knows that the woman in that film is not you. She is merely an actor in your dream. It sees you sitting in the balcony, watching her get married. As long as you are the one watching, the woman in the film will get the husband, and you will get the seat in the balcony." "How do I become the bride?" she asked. "Stop watching," he replied. "Tonight, do not visualize the wedding. Do not see the dress. Do not watch the aisle. Instead, feel the weight of the ring on your finger. Feel the warmth of his hand in yours, not as a visual image, but as a tactile sensation. Feel the presence of him beside you in your bed. Have the conversation, not as an actor speaking lines, but as a wife sharing a secret with her husband. When you imagine, do not look at yourself, be yourself. Experience the wedding from the perspective of the bride, not the camera." Elena followed these instructions. She stopped making a movie and began inhabiting a life. Within weeks, the distance between her and her beloved began to collapse. The internal shift caused an external rearrangement of circumstances that seemed, to the uninitiated, like a series of impossible coincidences. She did not manifest a wedding. She manifested a life. And the wedding was merely the natural, inevitable fruit of that shift in perspective. To embody this truth, you must renounce your role as the audience. Today, observe your own thoughts. Every time you catch yourself visualizing your goal, a promotion, a conversation, a new home, ask yourself, am I watching this or am I being this? If you are watching, stop. Close your eyes and shift your consciousness. If you are imagining a new home, do not walk through the rooms in your mind. Stand in the center of the living room and feel the carpet beneath your feet. Run your hand along the wall. Hear the silence of the house you already own. Do not look at the house, live in it. The trick is to use your senses as if they were already stimulated by the reality you desire. Hear the sounds that would be there. Feel the textures that would be there. Experience the emotions that would be there, not as excitement for the future, but as the quiet, steady contentment of the present. This is not a practice, it is a transformation of identity. You have learned to move from the balcony to the stage. You have begun to inhabit your desires, but there is a secret, darker and more powerful room in the fortress. We have spoken of the future, but what of the architecture of the past? We carry our history like a lead weight, unaware that our memories are the very blueprints for our stagnation. In our next assembly, we shall learn the most revolutionary trick of all, how to revise the past to liberate the future. Are you prepared to go back to the beginning and rewrite the script you have been living? The past is not written in stone. It is written in your subconscious, and the ink is still wet. We shall meet there, in the archives of your memory. Picture an ancient, sprawling library that exists not in the physical world, but within the subterranean vaults of the human soul. The shelves stretch toward an infinite ceiling, packed with millions of leather-bound volumes, each representing a single day of your life. The scent of parchment and aged ink hangs heavy in the air. Here, every laughter, every failure, every sharp word spoken, and every crushing defeat is catalogued with surgical precision. You stand in this library, believing you are a mere visitor, tasked with reading the books as they are written. You believe that once a sentence is etched upon the page, it is permanent, a fixed record of what happened. You walk the aisles, reading the accounts of your past. The botched interview, the love lost, the investment that withered, the words left unsaid. You view these records as the unalterable foundation upon which the future must be built. But observe the paradox. If your subconscious mind constructs your future based on the patterns of your past, and if you are convinced that the past is immutable, then you are a prisoner of your own memory. You are attempting to build a cathedral of hope on a foundation of shifting, decaying debris. You look at the ink of your past and see a sentence. But what if you were not the reader of this library? What if you were, and have always been, its librarian? Tonight, we step into the silent aisles. You are about to discover that the ink in these books is not dried, but fluid, waiting for the touch of a mind that understands the alchemy of time. The past is not a tomb, it is a workshop. To understand the mechanics of revision, we must first collapse our conventional obsession with linear time. The intellect views time as a river, a flow from a fixed past toward an uncertain future. It tells you that the past is gone and thus beyond your reach. But the subconscious mind knows nothing of clocks or calendars. It exists in an eternal present now. Why does the subconscious mind rely on the past to create the future? Because it seeks continuity. It looks for patterns of who you have been to determine who you will be. It is a creature of habit. It finds safety in the repetition of your history. If your history is defined by failure, the subconscious will faithfully manifest the conditions for future failure, believing it is fulfilling your identity. How, then, do we break this cycle? By utilizing the recursive nature of memory. When you remember an event, you are not retrieving an objective file from a hard drive. You are, in every instance of memory, re-experiencing that event. The neural pathways fire, the emotions surge, and the physical body responds as if the event is happening again. Therefore, memory is not a recording of the past, it is an act of creation in the present. If you re-experience a failure, you are currently impressing failure upon your subconscious. The why of this is simple. The subconscious cannot distinguish between an event that happened 20 years ago and an event that is being vividly felt now. It only registers the intensity of the impression. So, how do we revise? We must engage in the alchemy of reimagination. We take the memory, that specific, painful volume from the library, and we rewrite it. We do not deny that the event occurred in the outer world. We alter the internal record of that event. We move through the memory, changing the dialogue, changing our reactions, changing the outcome until the internal experience reflects success, grace, or power. Why does this work? Because when you consistently impress the revised memory upon the subconscious, you effectively overwrite the old template. The subconscious, sensing the new pattern, begins to discard the old, maladaptive behavior. It ceases to draw upon the failed memory as a blueprint for your future and begins to draw upon the successful one. You are not changing what happened to you, you are changing who you were during what happened to you. And in that shift, the future, which is merely the past extended, is fundamentally transformed. There was once a master architect named Julian, renowned for the stability of his designs. Yet Julian lived in a state of professional ruin. Years prior, in his youth, he had been commissioned to design a grand municipal plaza. The project had been his life's work. But on the day of the unveiling, a support beam had buckled due to a miscalculation, the stage had collapsed, and Julian had been publicly shamed before his peers. For a decade, that memory haunted him. Every time he stood before a blank drafting table, his hands would tremor. Every time he approached a new client, he felt the phantom weight of that collapsing beam. He assumed that his career was governed by that singular failure. He lived in the shadow of the fallen plaza. One evening, he sat with his teacher, a man who moved through the architecture of the mind with the ease of a breeze. Julian told him the story, weeping as he described the sound of the metal snapping, the roar of the crowd, the humiliation of his forced resignation. "And so," Julian concluded, "I am a failed architect. The past is the past, and I cannot erase the fact that the beam failed." The teacher leaned forward. "You are not tasked with erasing the event, Julian. You are tasked with erasing the version of you that gave up." The teacher instructed Julian to enter the twilight state every evening. He was to return to that day, to the hour before the unveiling. He was to walk through the plaza in his imagination, but this time he was to feel the strength of his own design. He was to imagine the beams holding firm. He was to hear the applause of the crowd, not the sound of the collapse. He was to experience the triumph of a successful launch, feeling the pride and the relief of a job perfected. "But that is not what happened," Julian protested. "It is what is happening now," the teacher replied. "The subconscious does not care about the calendar. If you impress the memory of a triumph, it will treat you as a triumphant man. If you persist in the memory of the collapse, you remain a failing man." For 2 weeks, Julian played the tape of the triumph. He refined the details until the memory felt more real, more visceral than the one he had held for a decade. He felt the success until it became the dominant impression of his identity. 1 month later, he was approached by a firm seeking an architect for a massive stadium. The old fear was absent. In its place was a quiet, unshakable confidence. He did not draft like a man afraid of collapse. He drafted like a man whose work was destined for glory. The stadium was built, and it stood as a marvel of engineering. Julian had not changed the event of his youth. He had changed the frequency of his memory, and in doing so, he had unlocked the talent that the failure had previously suppressed. To embody the power of revision, you must become the librarian of your own history. Today, identify one memory, one specific, recurring event or period that continues to exert a negative influence on your present identity. Perhaps it is a conversation that ended in rejection, a moment of cowardice you regret, or a period of financial hardship that left you feeling insecure. Do not dwell on the pain of it. Instead, take that memory into your next twilight gateway. Replay the event, but play it as the person you are now. Give your past self the wisdom you have gained. Change your words. Change your posture. Change the outcome. Make the scene one of grace, of success, of resolution. Do this nightly, with the conviction that you are not merely daydreaming, but performing a necessary act of surgery on your own psyche. You are removing the roots of a dead tree so that a new one may grow. Do this until the memory of the old event feels distant, unimportant, or even surreal, while the revised version feels like the true story of who you are. As you begin to dismantle the monuments of your past, remember the sanctity of this work. Like this passage, to confirm your sovereignty over your own history, and subscribe to our fellowship so that you may receive the next segment of this map without fail. You have learned to rewrite the past and re-navigate the twilight. But even the best revised history needs the fuel of something deeper to manifest in the physical world. We have discussed the what and the where, but we have yet to master the how. For the subconscious mind is not moved by logic, nor by visual pictures alone. It is moved by a language older than words, a language that echoes through the very core of your existence. In our next assembly, we shall learn to speak the native tongue of the subconscious. We shall explore the power of feeling the final, invisible bridge between the world within and the world without. Are you ready to stop using the blunt instrument of language and start speaking in the currency of the soul? We shall see you at the threshold. Imagine a man standing in a vast, silent cathedral. He holds a book of ancient prayers, its pages brittle, its ink faded. He speaks the words aloud, his voice echoing against the cold stone vaults, resonance rising and falling in a practiced, liturgical cadence. He believes that if he recites the words with enough precision, if he mimics the tone of the saints, the gates of heaven will swing open to grant his petitions. But the cathedral remains silent. The air stays frigid. His words are merely vibrations against unyielding rock, empty, hollow, and devoid of weight. He is a master of syntax, a technician of vocabulary, yet he is a pauper in the realm of influence. Now, consider the paradox. Why does the universe seem to turn a deaf ear to the most eloquent pleas, while simultaneously answering the wordless, agonizing cry of a broken heart? You have likely spent years shouting your desires into the void, using the language of logic, the dialect of I want, and the grammar of I hope. You have recited affirmations as if they were magical incantations, expecting the sheer repetition of syllables to shift the fabric of your reality. You have mistaken the menu for the meal. You have confused the label on the bottle for the vintage inside. The subconscious mind, the architect of your existence, is deaf to your spoken language. It does not understand the dictionary. It does not comprehend the intellectual justification for your dreams. It sits in the depths of your being, a primal, ancient force that communicates through a singular, potent medium, feeling. The universe does not give you what you ask for. It gives you what you are. And what you are is determined in every moment by the frequency of your emotional state. You are not a petitioner asking for change. You are an electromagnetic pulse broadcasting your reality into the manifest world. To master the language of feeling, we must dismantle the intellect's supremacy. Why does the conscious gatekeeper prioritize thought over feeling? Because thought is controllable, quantifiable, and seemingly safe. It allows us to analyze, categorize, and build a wall of logic between ourselves and our deepest vulnerabilities. But feeling is raw, tidal, and uncontrollable. It is the unfiltered energy of the soul. Why does the subconscious respond exclusively to feeling? Because feeling is the bridge between the internal state and the external result. If we apply recursive thinking, we must ask, how is reality constructed? It is constructed through attraction and resonance. The subconscious does not distinguish between a positive thought and a negative thought. It distinguishes between the vibrational weight of the impression. When you affirm, I am wealthy, but your internal state is saturated with the feeling of anxiety regarding your lack of funds, the subconscious receives two conflicting messages. The intellect provides the word wealth, but the heart provides the reality of poverty. Which message wins? The feeling, every time. The feeling is the anchor, the thought is merely the buoy. The subconscious will always execute the anchor. How, then, do we bridge the gap between our intellectual desires and our emotional state? We must realize that feeling is not an emotional reaction to an external event. It is a deliberate, internal frequency that you cultivate, regardless of current evidence. Most people believe they will feel happy when they achieve their goal. This is the ultimate error in the human narrative. The subconscious operates on the principle of feeling as the cause, not feeling as the effect. You must generate the feeling of the wish fulfilled before the evidence arrives. If you wait for the evidence to feel the success, you are a slave to the external world, perpetually waiting for the world to move first. To master the language of feeling is to accept that you are the primary cause of your own state. You do not feel good because things are good. Things are good because you have established the feeling of goodness as your dominant, unshakable state of being. In the verdant valley of Ethelgard, there lived a gardener named Elias, whose task was to tend to the emperor's fabled garden of manifestation. It was said that whatever was planted in this soil would, within a season, appear in the emperor's own private chambers. Thousands of travelers came to Elias, carrying bags of seeds, each seed representing a desperate desire: health, wealth, love, power. They would stand before Elias, shouting their intentions, reciting their logic, and begging him to plant their seeds. One woman, clutching a bag of seeds labeled "A Home of My Own," pleaded with him, "I have written my vision down every night. I have looked at pictures of houses. I have recited my affirmations until my throat was raw. Why does my soil remain barren?" Elias looked at her, his eyes reflecting the deep, dark earth of the garden. "You bring me the seeds of your desire," he said quietly, "but you bring me the soil of your anxiety. Look at your hands, they shake with the fear that you will never have this home. Your heart beats with the rhythm of lack. You try to plant a seed of abundance into the soil of scarcity. What do you expect to grow? But I am only being realistic, she cried. The housing market is cruel. My bank account is small. My fear is justified. Elias reached into the soil, pulling up a handful of dark, rich loam. The garden does not know what is realistic. It only knows what you impress upon it. You are flooding this ground with the feeling of, I need, I want, and I fear. The garden is, as always, being faithful. It is growing your fear. If you want a home, you must walk through this garden feeling the warmth of the hearth you do not yet possess. You must feel the contentment of the roof over your head. You must feel the security of a home already secured. Do not bring me your words. Bring me the emotional frequency of the thing itself. The woman stood in the garden, and for the first time, she stopped trying to convince the gardener. She let go of the logic. She closed her eyes and began to breathe, not with the hunger of a woman who needed a house, but with the gratitude of a woman who was already home. She imagined the smell of the hearth, the quiet peace of her own threshold, the deep, resonant security of belonging. She poured that feeling into the soil like water. Within weeks, the seeds of the house did not just grow, they bloomed into reality. The opportunities appeared, the circumstances aligned, and the path opened. Elias had taught her the secret. The seed of the desire is only half the battle. The feeling is the rain that gives it life. To embody the language of feeling, you must cease the attempt to manifest through intellect alone. Today, perform a check of your internal atmosphere. Every time you find yourself thinking of your desire, that new career, that relationship, that state of peace, immediately shift your focus from the thought to the feeling. Ask yourself, if this were already mine, what would my soul feel like right now? If you seek peace, do not think about how to achieve it. Simply drop the shoulders, soften the breath, and be the peace. Generate that frequency as if it were a radio signal you are broadcasting into the room. If you seek success, do not dwell on the steps to reach it. Dwell on the profound, quiet confidence that accompanies the arrival of success. Live in that emotional state for a few minutes, several times a day. Make it your home frequency. Do not be discouraged if the external world does not immediately shift. Your subconscious is currently recalibrating its machinery to match this new, persistent frequency. You are learning to speak the native tongue of the universe. You have learned to move through the gateway, to inhabit your perspective, to revise your history, and to speak the language of feeling. Yet, there remains one final, perilous, and magnificent hurdle. The transition from feeling it to having it requires a mastery of the most elusive quality of all: persistence. The world will try to lure you back into the old patterns of doubt. It will demand proof. In our next chapter, we shall explore the gravity of assumption and why holding your ground when the world screams impossible is the final key to your sovereign reality. Are you ready to stop being a mirror of the world and start being the one who forces the world to mirror you? The path is winding, but the summit is in view. We shall see you in the next assembly. A dense, unyielding winter fog blankets the harbor of an ancient city. Through the thick gray shroud, the towering hulls of merchant ships appear as nothing more than spectral outlines, floating precariously upon an invisible sea. A lone traveler stands at the edge of the stone pier, wrapped in a heavy wool cloak. He stares out into the white abyss, unable to see even 5 paces ahead. To his physical senses, the world has ceased to exist. There are no horizons, no distant shores, no guiding stars. There is only the damp chill clinging to his face and the hollow lapping of dark water against the masonry below. If this traveler were to rely solely on the testimony of his eyes, he would conclude that he is trapped on an island of isolation, utterly severed from the rest of civilization. Yet, he does not panic. He does not weep for the disappearance of the world. Why? Because beneath his feet he feels the cold, unmoving reality of the stone pier, and within his mind he holds an unshakable assumption. The city, the ocean, and the distant continents remain exactly where they were before the fog descended. He knows that the veil is temporary, an illusion of the atmosphere, and that the hidden landscape will inevitably reveal itself once more to the eye. Consider the profound paradox of human perception. You are told from the moment of your birth that seeing is believing. You are trained to look at the world of form, to collect the evidence of your current circumstances, and to let that data dictate who you are allowed to be. If your bank account is barren, you assume poverty. If your body is frail, you assume sickness. If your rooms are quiet, you assume loneliness. You allow the fluctuating, temporary fog of the external world to dictate the geography of your internal empire. But what if the reverse is the ultimate truth of the cosmos? What if believing is seeing? What if the material world is not a solid, independent monument, but a fluid, plastic shadow cast by the assumptions you carry within the secret chambers of your soul? Tonight, the relationship between cause and effect is inverted. You are about to discover that the world does not demand your submission to its facts. It is waiting, with bated breath, for the gravity of your assumption to force its compliance. To dissect the anatomy of an assumption is to explore the very mechanics of how consciousness hardens into matter. An assumption is not merely a passing thought, a hopeful wish, or a fragile daydream. It is a psychological verdict. It is the absolute, unquestioned decision that a specific condition is already the operational truth of your reality, regardless of whether the physical senses agree. Why does the human mind struggle so fiercely to maintain an assumption that contradicts physical evidence? To answer this using recursive inquiry, we must ask, what is the conscious mind's primary addiction? Its addiction is to the feedback loop of validation. The intellect operates as a mirror of the external environment. It looks out at the world, captures an image of limitation, and says, "This is true." Then it returns to the subconscious and stamps that limitation into the bedrock of identity. When you attempt to introduce a new assumption such as, "I am financially free," while staring at an overdue invoice, the conscious mind experiences an acute psychological crisis. It screams delusion, fraud, look at the numbers on the paper. It does this because it views the physical world as the cause and the internal state as the effect. It believes that the invoice is the reality and your assumption of wealth is a lie. But how does reality actually form? If we strip away the illusions of linear perception, we find that the physical world is not a beginning, it is an ending. It is the crystallized remains of past assumptions. The invoice you hold in your hand is not a current fact. It is the physical echo of the thoughts, feelings, and beliefs you entertained weeks, months, or years ago. It is a ghost from your psychological history. Therefore, when you argue with the current facts of your life, you are essentially arguing with a corpse. You are fighting an echo. How, then, does a new assumption reshape this architecture? The subconscious mind is the ultimate executor of pattern. It does not possess the capacity to analyze, debate, or reject. It is an uncritical, creative soil. When you plant an assumption within it and lock that assumption in place with the visceral weight of conviction, you alter the fundamental magnetic field of your being. The subconscious looks at the new assumption, "I am secure," and compares it to the outer world of lack. Because the subconscious cannot tolerate a discrepancy between its internal blueprint and the external environment, it immediately goes to work as the grand coordinator of circumstance. It begins to influence your impulses, alter your perceptions, draw specific opportunities into your orbit, and rearrange the behavior of others. The world must comply with the internal state because the internal state is the only true reality. You do not change your life by moving the furniture of the physical world. You change it by altering the gravity of your assumption until the physical world has no choice but to orbit around your new center. In the heart of an empire driven by commerce, there lived a merchant named Thomas. Through a series of catastrophic ventures, betrayals by trusted partners, and the unpredictable turns of the market, Thomas found himself buried beneath a mountain of debt. He owed more than 200,000 pieces of gold to the most ruthless moneylenders in the city. Every morning, Thomas sat at his scarred oak desk, staring at a thick, black ledger that contained the record of his ruin. The pages were filled with columns of figures that seemed to mock him. Every knock at his heavy wooden door made his stomach violently contract. He could feel the cold sweat break across his brow as he imagined the debtor's prison, the damp straw, the iron bars, the loss of his family's honor. Thomas was a pragmatic man, trained in mathematics and accounting. He looked at his empty vaults, he looked at his ledger, and he wept. "I am a ruined man," he whispered to the walls. "This debt is my absolute reality. There is no escape." One evening, as he wandered the shadowed alleys near the Temple district, he encountered an old philosopher who was known to see through the illusions of the marketplace. Thomas, desperate for any shred of solace, poured out his misery. He described the ledger, the numbers, the moneylenders, and the inevitability of his destruction. The philosopher listened in silence, his eyes fixed on the flickering light of a nearby brazier. When Thomas had finished, the philosopher asked a strange question. "Thomas, if you were to walk into the marketplace tomorrow with your vaults overflowing with gold, how would you carry yourself? How would you look upon those moneylenders? How would you breathe?" Thomas paused, the image catching him off guard. "If I were free of this burden," he mused, his voice softening, "I would walk with my head high. I would look those men in the eye without a flicker of fear. I would feel a profound, quiet weight of security in my chest. I would sleep through the night like a child." "Then go home," the philosopher commanded, "and burn the version of you that lives in that ledger. From this moment forward, you must assume the identity of the man who is already debt-free. Every time you think of money, do not think of your debt. Think from your wealth. When you look at an invoice, do not see a harbinger of ruin. See a receipt for a transaction that has already been abundantly covered by your limitless supply. Maintain this assumption as if it were more real than the stone walls of your house." "But that is a lie," Thomas protested. "The ledger does not change because I wish it so. The ledger is an obituary of your past errors," the philosopher countered. "If you continue to read it with fear, you ensure that tomorrow's page will read exactly the same. Change the script within, and the theater of the world must change its performance." With nothing left to lose, Thomas resolved to try. That night, as he lay in the dark, he closed his eyes and deliberately conjured the sensation of financial weightlessness. He felt the phantom texture of silk garments. He imagined his bank accounts balanced and thriving. When he rose the next morning and encountered his creditors, he did not cower. He maintained the internal posture of a man of immense resources, speaking with a calm, unhurried authority that startled them. For months, the external world showed no sign of relief. The letters still arrived, the demands remained loud. His conscious mind repeatedly called him a fool, a lunatic, living in a fantasy. Yet Thomas persisted. He refused to let the external fog dictate his internal geography. He anchored himself to the assumption of his freedom. Then the alignment began. A distant relative, whom Thomas had not spoken to in decades, passed away, leaving him a forgotten tract of land outside the city gates. Within weeks, the Imperial Army announced a massive expansion, requiring that exact parcel of earth for a new fortress. They purchased it from Thomas for a sum that not only erased his 200,000 pieces of gold, but left him with a massive fortune in reserve. When Thomas paid his final creditor, he did so from the exact state of calm certainty he had cultivated months before in the silence of his mind. He had not manipulated the empire. He had simply refused to validate the illusion of his ruin until his subconscious servant was forced to construct his freedom. To possess the sovereignty of the Creator, you must learn to stand firm when the world demands your surrender. Today, look directly at the area of your life that causes you the greatest anxiety, be it your health, your career, or your relationships. Acknowledge the current facts without anger or resistance. They are merely the dead leaves of your past assumptions. Then, make your decision. Define the reality you desire and assume it is already your truth. When you leave your home today, do not walk as a person seeking a solution. Walk as the person who has already found it. If you are seeking health, assume the posture, the breath, and the quiet vitality of a well body. If you are seeking a career breakthrough, move through your day with the quiet confidence of an executive whose authority is unquestioned. When your senses report lack or delay, look through them as if they were nothing more than the morning fog. Say to yourself within the silence of your mind, this external display is merely an echo. My internal assumption is the law. You have learned to hold your assumption against the storm of external evidence. You have discovered that the world must bend to the internal verdict. But an assumption cannot remain an abstract concept within the mind. It must find its expression in the way you move, speak, and interact with the living world. The architecture of reality requires that your physical body become an active broadcast tower for the new identity. In our next assembly, we shall step onto the stage of physical manifestation. We shall unlock the master art of acting as if. Not as an act of childish pretense, but as a deliberate behavioral biofeedback loop that forces the subconscious mind to accelerate the crystallization of your dreams. Are you ready to dress, speak, and walk as the sovereign you were born to be? The wardrobe of your new life is waiting. In the heart of the great metropolis, beneath the cold, indifferent glare of neon signs and the rushing tide of humanity, there walks a person whose identity is a meticulously crafted masterpiece. They walk through the corridors of power and the alleys of struggle with an ease that borders on the divine. They are not merely occupying space, they are commanding it. To the casual observer, this individual is wealthy, loved, and profoundly secure, perhaps even the heir to an empire. Yet, peel back the layers of the external manifestation, and you may find that this person is currently in the midst of a radical transition, possessing nothing but a resolute internal decree of their own sovereign reality. Consider the unsettling paradox. The world is a stage upon which we are both the lead actor and the chief critic. We are taught to wait for the big break, to wait for the recognition, for the gold, or for the partner, believing that we must become worthy of the role before we can inhabit it. We treat our lives like a dress rehearsal for a performance that never begins. We whisper our lines in the dark, hoping that someone, the universe, fate, or some celestial casting director will finally notice us and hand us the lead. But the theater of life operates on an inverse principle. On this stage, the props are only delivered to those who already walk with the stride of a star. You see, the universe does not reward the applicant, it rewards the occupant. When you behave as if the dream is still a distant destination, you send a signal of lack that resonates through the very marrow of your bones. Your posture, your tone of voice, the very way you hold your gaze. These are the involuntary broadcasts that inform the subconscious of your true status. You are playing the role of the beggar while dreaming of the king. Tonight, we shall step into the spotlight. You are about to learn that acting as if is not an act of deception, but an act of total psychological synchronization. To master the art of acting as if, one must first confront the terrifying liberation of radical responsibility. Why does the ego resist this practice? Because the ego thrives on the distinction between who it is and what it desires. If the ego were to fully embody the desire, the gap, the comfortable, self-pitying gap would close. And if that gap closes, the ego must grow. Let us employ recursive inquiry to understand the mechanics of this behavioral biofeedback. Why does the subconscious mind require physical behavioral cues? Because the subconscious is, in its essence, a biological executor. It is designed to sustain the homeostasis of your organism. If your dominant thoughts are of power, but your physical behavior is that of a victim, the subconscious must resolve the cognitive dissonance. It looks at your behavior as the ground truth. It observes your cowering posture and your hesitant speech and concludes, "My master is currently in a state of weakness. I must therefore manifest circumstances that reinforce this state to ensure their consistency." How does the body act as a transmitter? Every movement, every gesture, and every habitual reaction is a neural signal sent inward. When you move with the quiet, unhurried confidence of a person who has nothing to prove, you are sending a direct, non-verbal command to the subconscious. You are telling it, this is the identity. Configure the world to match this frequency. This is not a process of faking it. Faking implies an attempt to deceive an external audience. Acting as if is an attempt to align the inner and outer architecture of the self. When you act as if, you are performing an act of neurological surgery. You are creating a loop. Your internal assumption generates a behavior. That behavior triggers a specific neurochemical response in your body. That response confirms the assumption, and the subconscious, seeing this perfect loop of congruence, has no choice but to manifest the physical environment that matches that internal reality. Why do most people fail? Because they try to perform the behavior without the internal anchor of the assumption. They act successful for an hour at a networking event, then return home to a dark room of doubt. This is a dissonance that the subconscious detects immediately. You must act as if you are, not because you want to be seen, but because you have already accepted the truth of your being. You are not putting on a costume. You are simply removing the mask of who you were, revealing the face of who you already are. In a forgotten kingdom nestled in the mountains, there lived a young woman named Alara. She was a simple scullery maid, tasked with the most menial of labors. Her life was defined by the smell of wood smoke, the roughness of linen, and the constant bowed head humility that was expected of her station. Yet, Alara carried a secret in her heart. She was, according to the ancient bloodlines of her lineage, the rightful heir to the throne, a throne currently occupied by a usurper who had convinced the people that her family line was extinct. Alara knew the truth, but she felt the crushing weight of her circumstances. She walked the halls of the castle, invisible to the guards, ignored by the nobles. She was the queen, but she looked like a servant. She was the sovereign, but she spoke like a supplicant. She sought out the old gardener, a man who had served her father, and wept at his feet. "I am the queen, yet I am a slave," she cried. "The world sees a maid. How can I reclaim my crown when my very presence screams of my poverty?" The gardener looked at her, his eyes wise with the weight of centuries. "My child, you are waiting for the coronation to give you the majesty. But majesty is not granted by a crown. It is worn in the carriage of the soul. You want to be queen to behave like one? No. You must behave like the queen so that the kingdom can finally see who stands before them. But if I stand tall," she feared, "they will mock me. They will say the scullery maid has gone mad." "Let them mock the illusion," the gardener replied. "You are not acting for them, you are acting for the throne. Dress your heart in the robes of your station. Speak as if your voice commands the laws of the land. Move as if your feet walk upon the carpets of the throne room, not the stone floors of the kitchens. Do not wait for the crown. Carry yourself as if it already rests upon your brow." Alara began her practice. It started in the small things. She walked with a regal, measured pace. She held her head with the quiet pride of one who serves no one but her own conscience. She spoke to the servants and the nobles alike, not with the stuttering fear of the invisible, but with the steady, golden warmth of a sovereign. She did not demand recognition. She simply occupied the space of her own truth. When the usurper's guards encountered her, they did not see a maid. They were struck by an inexplicable, commanding presence that made them lower their spears without a word. When the people of the court saw her, they felt an ancient, forgotten memory stir in their hearts. One afternoon, in the courtyard, she stood before the usurper himself. He looked at her, intending to scold her for her audacity, but his breath caught in his throat. In her eyes, in the way she stood, in the effortless command she radiated, he saw not a servant, but the living ghost of the lineage he had sought to destroy. The court fell silent. The air grew heavy with the weight of her presence. She had not raised a sword, but the usurper knew, as did the entire court, that he was looking at the queen. She had not changed the external world by force. She had changed her own posture, and the world had been forced to recognize the truth that she had persistently embodied. To embody the power of acting as if, you must identify the identity you wish to manifest. Today, ask yourself, how would the person I am becoming walk through this day? If you seek the identity of a leader, do not wait for the title. Speak with the clarity, the courage, and the unwavering conviction of one who carries the weight of responsibility. If you seek the identity of a beloved partner, do not move through the world with the desperate, grasping energy of the lonely. Move with the quiet, radiant confidence of one who is already cherished. This is not a performance for the benefit of others. It is a biofeedback loop for your own subconscious. When you catch yourself defaulting to your old posture, slumped shoulders, apologetic tone, frantic energy, consciously, physically correct yourself. Straighten the spine, breathe deeply, speak with intention, use your body to force your mind into alignment. You will find that as your behavior shifts, your internal atmosphere changes, and the external world begins to present you with the very opportunities that belong to your new identity. You have learned to rewrite your history, to speak the language of feeling, to hold your assumption, and to manifest through the body. But all of these tricks, powerful as they are, require one master key to turn the lock of the universe. You can act, you can feel, and you can imagine, but if you abandon the practice at the first sign of delay, the seed will never break the soil. In our next assembly, we shall master the most profound and difficult principle of all, persistence. We shall learn why the period of invisible growth is the true test of the Creator, and how to stay the course when the world demands you return to the life you have outgrown. Are you ready to become the master of time itself? The harvest is coming. We shall see you at the finish line. Picture a colossal oak tree, its gnarled roots burrowing deep into the bedrock of the earth, its crown a cathedral of rustling emerald leaves against a sapphire sky. It stands as a monument of endurance, having survived centuries of lightning, gale-force winds, and the slow, grinding erosion of the seasons. Yet, if one were to witness the first day of that tree's existence, they would see nothing more than a fragile, unassuming acorn nestled in the damp, dark soil. To the observer who understands only the logic of the immediate, that acorn is a stationary, stagnant object. It shows no sign of life. It offers no proof of its potential. It sits in silence, buried beneath the weight of the dirt. Consider the unsettling paradox of creation. The most profound transformations in the universe occur in the dark, during the long, agonizing interval between the planting of the seed and the breaking of the surface. We live in an era of instant gratification, where the pulse of human life is synchronized to the ticking of a digital clock. We demand that our manifestations appear with the speed of a text message, and when they do not, we conclude that the machinery of our minds is broken. We dig up the seed to check for roots, we curse the soil for its silence, and we abandon the garden, declaring the land barren. But look at the oak. Its majesty was not birthed in a moment of frantic activity. It was birthed through the quiet, relentless, and unwavering persistence of life, pushing against the weight of the earth, day after day, year after year, refusing to succumb to the stillness of the surface. What we call the results are merely the final, visible acts of a drama that has been playing out in the unseen world for an eternity. Tonight, we confront the final gate. You are about to discover that the only thing standing between you and the realization of your greatest desire is not a lack of skill, nor a lack of luck, but a lack of staying power. Persistence is the gravity that holds your intention in place until the world has no choice but to coalesce around it. To master persistence, one must first confront the nature of the dormancy period. Why does reality exhibit a lag between the internal impression and the external manifestation? Using the method of recursive inquiry, we must ask, what is the purpose of this delay? The delay is not a punishment, it is a filter. It is the protective mechanism of the universe, ensuring that only those impressions held with genuine, unwavering conviction are allowed to crystallize into the physical world. If every fleeting whim of the human mind manifested instantly, the world would be a landscape of chaotic, contradictory rubble. The delay is the grace of the system. It gives you the time to refine your identity, to stabilize your frequency, and to prove to the subconscious that you are the master of your own house. How does persistence actually alter the subconscious? We must understand the difference between a touch and an impression. Imagine the subconscious as a block of fine, malleable clay. If you press your thumb into the clay and immediately pull it away, the surface might show a faint indentation, but the surrounding material will eventually swell to fill the void, erasing your mark. This is the fate of the fleeting desire, the wish made at breakfast and forgotten by dinner. However, if you apply the same pressure in the same spot repeatedly, day after day, the clay begins to lose its resistance. It begins to retain the shape of your intent. Persistence is the act of applying consistent pressure to the subconscious. When you assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled, you are applying the pressure. When you do it again the next night, you are deepening the impression. Eventually, the subconscious reaches a point of critical density. At this precise moment, the internal impression becomes more real to the mind than the external environment. Once the subconscious accepts the assumption as the primary reality, it triggers the necessary external events to bring the physical world into alignment. Why do most people fail at this? They fail because they define reality by their sensory observations rather than their internal convictions. They look at the external world as the judge and jury. When the external world provides no evidence of their success, they accept that truth as final. But the master of persistence understands that the external world is a lagging indicator. It is like the wake left behind by a ship. The ship has already turned, but the water continues to follow the old trajectory for a time. Persistence is the discipline of keeping the helm turned, even when the water still flows in the old direction. In the coastal city of Oakhaven, there lived a master weaver named Silas. Silas was known for producing tapestries so intricate that they were said to capture the very essence of the stars. But for years, Silas had been laboring in obscurity, his shop tucked away in a dusty corner, his creations ignored by the wealthy patrons of the capital. He was a man of immense talent, but his life was defined by the silence of the marketplace. Silas had been taught the arts of the mind. He knew that if he could impress the feeling of success upon his subconscious, the world would respond. And so he began to work. Every morning, he stood at his loom, not as a desperate man looking for his next meal, but as a man whose tapestries were displayed in the emperor's own halls. He felt the phantom weight of the gold coins in his purse. He heard the murmur of admiration from crowds that did not yet exist. 1 month passed, the shop remained empty. 2 months passed. The only customers were those who walked past his door without a glance. His friends began to mock him. "Silas," they said, "you weave tapestries of air. You are a dreamer, but the world demands coins, not daydreams." His conscious mind began to revolt. It shouted, "Look at the ledger, look at the empty shelves. You are a fool." Every instinct begged him to stop the practice, to pack his loom, and to take a job at the docks, where he could at least earn a pittance to feed his children. The pressure of the external reality became a physical weight, pressing against his chest, urging him to surrender his vision for the safety of the known. But Silas refused. He remembered the teaching, the subconscious is a garden, and the garden needs time. He treated every rejection not as a failure, but as a test of his resolve. He continued to walk, speak, and weave from the consciousness of the man whose work was sought after by the world. He did not check the soil for sprouts. He simply tended to the garden consistently, day after day, for 8 long months. Then, on a Tuesday, a storm struck the coast, delaying a shipment of tapestries intended for the royal palace. The royal courier, desperate and stranded in Oakhaven, wandered into Silas's shop seeking shelter. He looked up at the wall, where Silas had hung his latest work, a tapestry he had finished while fully inhabiting the feeling of success. The courier stopped. He was mesmerized. He had never seen such craft. The rest of the story is the stuff of legend. The courier purchased the piece for an exorbitant sum and carried it to the emperor. The emperor, moved to tears by the work, demanded the weaver. Within a year, Silas was not just a weaver, he was the royal artisan. When asked later how he had achieved such rapid success, Silas merely smiled and pointed to his loom. "I did not succeed in a year," he said. I succeeded the day I decided who I was, and I refused to let the world convince me otherwise until the world finally recognized what I had never stopped seeing. To embody the principle of persistence, you must learn to live in the in-between. Today, commit to the long view. If you have chosen an assumption, a new career, a healed relationship, a state of abundance, guard that assumption with your life. Do not look for signs. Do not wait for the evidence. When the doubt comes, and it will come, like the fog at the harbor, do not fight it. Simply observe it as a temporary shadow and return to your internal anchor. The measure of your power is not how well you can visualize when you are happy. It is how well you can hold your assumption when you are confronted by the opposite. Every time you refuse to yield to the external appearance, you are applying the final pressure to the subconscious clay. You are effectively carving your reality into stone. You have learned to rewrite your history, to speak the language of feeling, to hold your assumption, to manifest through the body, and now to persist through the silence. Yet, all of these principles must be synthesized into a daily, effortless way of being. In our next assembly, we shall learn to prune the garden. We shall discover how to identify and remove the lingering weeds of doubt, and how to protect your subconscious sanctuary from the intrusive noise of the outer world. You are approaching the summit. The air is thin, but the view is transcendent. Are you ready to master the protection of your inner garden? We shall see you at the final gate. Imagine a magnificent, walled estate at the very center of your being. This is the garden of reality. Within its borders, the soil is of a supernatural fertility, capable of manifesting whatever seed is pressed into its depths. The air is warm, the light is constant, and the ground is perfectly prepared for the harvest. Yet, as you walk the perimeter of this garden, you are struck by a chilling observation. It is choked with weeds. There are brambles of fear, thickets of doubt, and the creeping, strangling ivy of limiting beliefs that you planted yourself, perhaps years ago, during moments of vulnerability or despair. You look at the fruit of your life, the relationships that have withered, the projects that have stalled, the health that feels fragile, and you realize with startling clarity that these are not the products of a barren wasteland. They are the harvest of these very weeds. You have been a negligent gardener, leaving the gate open to the stray seeds of public opinion, the invasive species of past trauma, and the drought-inducing thoughts of not enough. The paradox is that you have always possessed the power to manifest, yet you have used that power with the recklessness of a child playing with fire. You see the world as a place that happens to you, a wilderness of accidents and unfortunate turns, while all the while the garden within your own soul has been working with perfect, terrifying fidelity to sprout exactly what you have fed it. You have been reaping the crop of your own unconsciousness. Tonight, you must take up the shears. You must become the custodian. You must enter the garden not as a victim of the growth, but as the master of the soil. For until the weeds of the old identity are cleared, there is no space for the oak of your new reality to take root. To master the garden of reality, one must engage in the rigorous discipline of internal weeding. Why is it so difficult for the average mind to maintain the sanctity of its inner life? Using recursive inquiry, we ask, why does the subconscious cling to the weeds of our past? The subconscious is not interested in your happiness. It is interested in your survival through continuity. The weeds, your self-limiting beliefs, your fearful expectations, your rehearsed failures provide a sense of known terrain. The mind prefers the familiarity of a painful memory over the uncertainty of a blank, fertile plot of land. We are, at a foundational level, addicted to the comfort of our own limitations. How do these weeds manifest as reality? Every negative assumption is a command. When you harbor a recurring belief that I am always misunderstood or success is not for people like me, you are planting a seed that has a faster growth cycle than your conscious, stated desires. Why? Because these beliefs are reinforced by the feeling of the evidence you see every day. The weed is nourished by the very emotion of the experience. It is a self-sustaining ecosystem of dysfunction. To weed the garden, we must understand the process of intellectual pruning. Most people attempt to pull weeds by fighting the external problem. They try to fix the relationship, fix the finances, or fix the health issue. This is equivalent to cutting the tops off the weeds while leaving the roots buried deep in the soil of the subconscious. They grow back, stronger and more bitter, the very next morning. The true work is done at the root. You must identify the core belief, the fundamental, often unconscious assumption that supports the unwanted growth. Why do I believe I am unworthy? How did I come to this conclusion? By tracing the thought back to its source, you expose it to the light of your conscious awareness. Once a weed is exposed to the light of conscious recognition, it loses its power. It is no longer an invisible governing law. It is merely an obsolete file in the library of your mind. You then replace it with a positive template. You do not leave the space empty, for a vacuum in the garden will immediately attract new seeds of chaos. You replace the weed of I am unworthy with the sturdy, vibrant perennial of I am, the architect of my own worth. This is not just a thought, it is a declaration of sovereignty over the soil. There was a high steward named Julian, tasked with managing the royal conservatory, a glass-domed garden of legendary beauty. For decades, the conservatory had produced only bitter fruit and gray, wilted flowers. The king was displeased, and the people of the realm whispered that the land had been cursed by ancient spirits of decay. Julian, a man of great intellect, had studied every book on botany. He brought in the finest fertilizers from across the seas. He installed complex irrigation systems and hired an army of workers to prune the leaves. Yet, the bitterness remained. The fruit tasted of ash. The flowers smelled of rot. Julian grew gaunt, his mind consumed by the failure of his science. One evening, an old, blind woman approached the glass gates. She had once been the chief gardener before the curse began. She smelled the air and laughed a dry, raspy sound that echoed in the vast dome. "You are a master of the surface, Julian," she said. "You prune the branches, but you ignore the soil. You fight the effect, but you serve the cause." "What do you mean?" Julian demanded. "The soil is rich. I have tested it." "The soil is rich with the history of the king's grief," the old woman said, pointing to the ground. "When the king lost his beloved queen, he walked these paths for years, weeping into the earth. He buried his anger here. He planted his doubts here. He fed this soil with the bitter, iron-rich salts of his sorrow. The garden is not cursed. It is simply faithful. It is growing exactly what was planted. You cannot change the harvest until you dig out the ghosts." Julian realized that he had been trying to grow joy in a graveyard of heartbreak. He spent the next month performing a deep clearing. He did not look for flowers. He looked for the buried bitterness. He worked through the night, digging deep into the dark, cold earth, pulling out the petrified remains of the king's old sorrow, his regrets, and his fears. He stood in the mud, weeping as he cleared the space, acknowledging the old grief so that it could be released rather than repressed. Once the soil was clear, he did not rush to plant. He sat in the silence of the empty conservatory, feeling the vast potential peace of the clean earth. He allowed the garden to breathe. Only then did he begin to plant the new seeds, seeds of vitality, of gratitude, and of absolute, quiet strength. The following spring, the conservatory was not merely restored, it was transformed. The fruit was sweet, the flowers vibrated with impossible colors, and the air held the scent of a new beginning. The people called it a miracle, but Julian knew the truth. There had been no miracle. There had only been the courage to dig deep enough to find the weeds, and the patience to leave the soil clean enough for the truth to bloom. To embody the role of the custodian, you must perform a soil audit. Today, find a quiet space where you will not be disturbed. Take a piece of paper and write down the areas of your life that feel bitter or wilted. Be brutally honest. Do not blame the world. Look at the garden of your own mind. Ask yourself, what fundamental assumption am I carrying about this area of my life? If you see I am a failure, acknowledge it. Do not suppress it. Look at it, see the weed for what it is, and then with the authority of the master of the soil, physically tear it out of your consciousness. Affirm aloud, I no longer grant this belief permission to exist in my garden. Then, immediately replace it. If you pulled out, I am a failure, plant, I am a creator of value. Feel the weight of that new belief. Water it with the feeling of gratitude. Do this for every weed you find. Your garden is your sanctuary. You are the only one who decides what takes root there. Guard your thoughts as a king guards his borders. If you are ready to reclaim the purity of your inner landscape, lock your commitment. Like this guidance as a seal upon your garden, and subscribe to our chronicles so that you may receive the final, ultimate key to this transformation. You have cleared the ground. You have mastered the twilight, the revision, the feeling, the persistence, and the pruning. You are no longer the apprentice of your life. You are the architect. But there is a final, crowning truth to be revealed, a truth that collapses the distance between the seeker and the sovereign. In our final assembly, we shall learn how to step fully into the throne of your own being, where the tricks are no longer necessary, for you have become the reality you once only dared to imagine. Are you ready to stop manifesting and start simply being? We shall meet at the throne. The journey concludes not at a destination, but at a mirror. Imagine standing at the threshold of a vast, crystalline chamber where the architecture of the universe seems to converge. Before you stands a figure, bathed in an amber light that feels both ancient and eternally new. You reach out to touch the figure, expecting the cold resistance of glass, but your hand passes through into a warmth that is indistinguishable from your own skin. The mirror vanishes. The separation collapses. You realize with a sudden, breathtaking clarity that you have been looking for the architect in the halls of the fortress, in the library of the past, and in the garden of the mind, never realizing that the architect was the one doing the looking. Consider the ultimate paradox. You have spent these chapters learning how to trick your subconscious, how to plant seeds, and how to revise your history. You have mastered the mechanics of the shadow play. But tonight, the shadow play ends. You arrive at the realization that there is no subconscious servant separate from the conscious master. There is only the unified field of your own consciousness. You have been operating under the illusion of a dualistic universe, a world of subject and object, of the desire and the manifester. You believed that you were a pilot flying a machine, but as you stand in the amber light, the machine, the pilot, and the destination dissolve into a singular, radiant point of presence. You are not a human being trying to gain the favor of a divine creative force. You are the creative force, momentarily focused through the lens of a human perspective, having convinced yourself that you were limited so that you could enjoy the exquisite, agonizing, and magnificent game of creation. The game is over. The sovereign has returned to the throne. To arrive at the state of the sovereign creator, one must transcend the very tools we have labored to master. Why was it necessary to use these techniques in the first place? We use recursion to peel back the layers of the ego. Why did we need the drowsy state? Because we believed we were separate from our desires. Why did we need to act as if? Because we believed our environment held more authority than our internal state. How do we transcend them? By realizing that these techniques are simply crutches for a mind that is still tethered to the belief in lack. Why is the sovereign creator beyond techniques? Because techniques imply an effort to change something that is not yet so. The sovereign creator operates from the state of it is already done. When you are the king, you do not need to manifest your kingdom. You simply inhabit it. You do not try to be the king. You hold the consciousness of the throne as the baseline of your existence. How does this shift the structure of reality? It moves the locus of power from the doing to the being. The doing is the realm of the subconscious servant, the endless cycle of impressing and manifesting. The being is the realm of the creator, the state of absolute, pre-existing fullness. When you fully embody the sovereignty, you stop looking at the world as a place to be manipulated. You view the world as an extension of your own breath. The recursive cycle of I want, therefore I manifest, collapses into the singular I am. In this state, you do not attract reality, you radiate it. The subconscious, the conscious, and the external world are revealed to be ripples in the same pond, and you are the water. By realizing you are the water, you no longer need to worry about the movement of the ripples. You simply are. This is the end of the struggle. This is the peace that passes all understanding, not because you have won the game, but because you have realized you were the one who wrote the rules of the game in the first place. In the high annals of the East, it is told that a great emperor once sought the secret of immortality. He traveled to the summit of the hidden peak to consult a sage who was said to possess the mirror of truth. The emperor expected to find a magical relic, a mirror that would show him how to conquer death, how to expand his borders forever, and how to solidify his reign for eternity. He climbed for 40 days, his royal robes torn, his pride stripped away by the thin mountain air. When he finally reached the cave of the sage, he found no scrolls, no artifacts, no mystical machines. There was only a simple, polished bronze mirror hanging on the wall. "Where is the secret?" the emperor demanded, his voice echoing in the chamber. "I have traveled the world to find the secret of eternal life and sovereign power. Show me the mirror of truth." The sage gestured to the bronze disc. The emperor stepped forward, his heart pounding. He expected to see his own face, but as he stared into the mirror, he did not see the emperor. He saw the mountains outside. He saw the clouds drifting past. He saw the face of the sage, the dust on the floor, the stars beginning to ignite in the twilight sky. He saw everything, the entire, vast, moving tapestry of existence, but he could not find himself. "I do not see me," the emperor cried. "Where is the emperor? Where is the secret?" The sage spoke, his voice like the grinding of tectonic plates. "The secret you seek is the death of the one who is looking. You ask for sovereign power, but you want it for an emperor who believes he is separate from the empire. You want to control the world, never realizing that you are the space in which the world arises." The emperor stood in the silence. He looked at the mirror again. He looked at the vastness. It reflected the mountains, the stars, the life, and the death. He realized that if he were not separate from the world, there was nothing to lose, and therefore nothing to fear. If he were the space in which the stars moved, he was already the stars. If he were the canvas upon which the empire was painted, he was already the empire. He sat on the cold floor of the cave. He let go of his crown. He let go of his titles. He let go of the emperor who was trying to gain power. In that moment of total surrender, the emperor vanished, and the sovereign remained. He returned to his throne, not as a man trying to rule, but as the consciousness of the kingdom itself. He reigned not by command, but by the quiet, radiant embodiment of his own fullness. He never grew old, for the space that contains the stars does not age. He had found the only immortality worth having, the realization that he was the life that was living him. You're fighting a war you can't win because you're attacking the wrong target. Most people think their reality is shaped by the world around them, but the truth is, you're currently locked out of your own life by a gatekeeper you've been feeding for years. Your conscious mind is the gatekeeper. It's a critic, a logician, and a skeptic designed to keep you safe by keeping you exactly where you are. Every time you try to change your life with positive thinking, the gatekeeper intercepts the command, checks its facts, sees your bank account, sees your loneliness, and rejects your request as a lie. You're trying to kick down the front door of your own fortress. But there is a secret entrance. Your subconscious mind is a vast, fertile garden that doesn't know the difference between a dream and a reality. It only knows what you impress upon it with absolute conviction. The trick isn't to force the door. It's to wait for the gatekeeper to fall asleep. In the twilight state, the drowsy, golden hour before you fall into a deep sleep, your critical factor vanishes. That is when you plant the seed. That is when you stop observing your life like a spectator and start living it from within. The epiphany is simple. Stop trying to convince your logical mind that your desire is true. Just feel the reality of it in the silence of the night until your subconscious adopts it as a fact. If you want to master your internal world, you must stop being the observer and become the architect. Mastery is a choice, and you're fighting a war you can't win.